Okay, so in this one we're going to take a look at how we might approximate the effect that occurs when you kind of stretch an elastic fabric over the wooden ribs, and it starts to kind of like dip in between, you know. So I'm just going to copy some of these over, start something new. I guess I should copy that. All right, and I'm just going to cap these so that they're a bit easier to see. Okay, I'm going to go to my blue layer here and just now again there's a few different ways I think that this could work. I'm trying to introduce maybe a simple version, a little bit tedious, but this may work for some of your projects, and I think with a little post-processing in the drawings may actually come out okay. Um, but if any others come to mind, you know, we can explore that option, and if any others come to mind amongst yourselves, let me know. What I'm going to do is basically, it's quite simple. It's sort of working with the tools we've already used and sequences we've already used, and I'm just basically going to construct a set of kind of subtle curves in between the edges of these ribs, and then just basically sweep around. Um, and that'll give us a kind of a net overall effect. Basically, putting this together piece by piece, it'll give us the overall effect of it appearing more like a rib cage, you know, and a tensed skin. So let's give it a shot. I'll just work in between, I guess, a couple of these layers for now, and we'll take it from there. So I'm going to want to work with, I'm going to need a curve to work with, so I'm going to dupe this edge here, and I guess probably going to want to bring it around to the other side, so I'll go with that side as well, and then I'll do the same here on this rib. Alright, and yeah, let's do the other side of this one, because I'm going to continue on down the line, just to see what the two look like together, two sections. Okay, and maybe I'll do three. Yeah, just gonna do a couple more there. Okay. All right. Good. And I think we're gonna need to give this a little bit of an offset. I mean, potentially not, but let me just take a look here. Let me just show you what I have kind of tested, just to give you an idea. The reason why there's a little bit of an offset, I just thought, you know, again, to kind of so that the graphics card doesn't get tricked into overlapping the two surfaces, and that we can, you know, make it very certain that one skin is basically over the top of a frame as opposed to intersecting or interacting with it in a strange way. You can go ahead and decide on whether or not you think that's important, you know, to have the offset. You could, everything that I'm about to do, you could do without the offset. You could just go ahead and go point to point, construct out the curve, and do the sweeping. But I gave it a subtle offset so that when I connect this surface and that one, they, they're continuous across without direct overlap of the rib itself. You know, again, I just think it makes for a slightly more, a little bit better visual appearance, at least on screen, but the drawings may dictate otherwise. So you'll have to kind of, you know, use your better judgment here. But just as a kind of modeling process, hopefully this will give you some idea for how you might be able to get an effect like that. And then we can debate whether or not, you know, this sort of detail here works. Maybe there's other ways to blend these two surfaces together. I just haven't really tested that out just yet. So anyway, let's walk through that. It should be relatively straightforward. First up, you know, just to get the offset, what I'm going to do is select these curves here that I just duplicated. And in my model here, they're separated, at least along those ribs and this one. And it may not be the case on that last one there, so yeah, this one's probably continuous. Okay. Okay, and then I'm just going to type in join, make sure they're all kind of joined into. Oh, looks like I may have forgotten that one there. Let's join this as well. Looks like I'm good now. Okay, join. Cool. And after that's been joined, I'm going to just offset these a tiny little bit. So offset curve. The distance will be something small. Try that, see how it looks. Select the curve, and that might be a little overkill, obviously. Let's do that again. Distance instead, like 0.05 maybe. Yeah, that's probably pretty nice. Okay, something really nice and subtle. Okay. And I'm just going down the line and offsetting all those edges that we just duplicated on both sides of the ribs to give me something new to work from. Okay, because I stopped there, looks like. Good. Alright, let me take a look at the bottom of these. Yeah, there's a little bit of a point there. I'm probably going to want to do this in half, at least for these two, and then mirror them around. So in that case, what we're going to want to do for these, at least, is explode them. And then we're going to have to probably rejoin them again. It looks like they came together in fragments, so I'm going to turn that off for a moment. Actually, I'll keep that on because it'll help me figure out which one is which here. Okay, looks like this one's okay. That's continuous. I'm just going to work one side at a time, making sure there's nothing missing. That one's continuous. Okay, this looks good actually. They're all continuous. I thought maybe they would come together in fragments, but it doesn't look like that's the case. Good. That's easier. And we're once again going to do a rebuild. You know the drill. It's going to make those surfaces, I think, a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to rebuild these. Let's see, I guess something like that might work. Nice and clean. Okay. So I'm going to use my construction line now, and I'm going to draw out a straight line from the corner or the end point of that offset curve over to the next one in line, like this, just to start setting myself up. I'm going to put a midpoint there, and then I'm just going to move that midpoint using the gumball a little bit in that direction, maybe something like that. All right, and then I'm going to just use a control point curve, and here's where you're going to have to eyeball how much stretch you think you might want to see in your model. That might be a lot. That might be a bit exaggerated, you know. So I'll delete this. Actually, I'm just going to click on the curve, and which will turn on the control points, and then I can maybe just adjust that a little bit. Right. So you can go back and forth, play around a little bit with how much, you know, kind of tautness, if you will, how much stretch you're going to want to see on this. I'm just going to keep it a little more subtle, maybe something like that. I guess once it's modeled in, you probably don't need that construction line anymore. Some of you may want to keep it as a reference, though. Okay, and then we're going to do this one more time, but just underneath here. We're going to want to make sure that when we make these surfaces that we're forcing it to and this is true for my model, again, if you have a continuous curve, something that does not come to a point like this one does, then you don't probably need to do this. You can just sweep it all the way around. But I'm going to do this in half, and I'm going to make sure that I have a section here that's directly in line down the center. Otherwise, it might look a little weird when I do the sweep later. So I'm going to do the same process, but this time in the vertical direction. Draw out a midpoint there. Move it up a bit. Control point curve this one. And if I need to make adjustments, I can do that. Sometimes it's easier to delete that point because it'll interfere with the control point. Alright. Okay. And yeah, so from here it's just basically a sweep. So let's see how it comes out. Sweep 2. The first rail will be one of those. Second, and then the sections are going to be the curves you just drew. That. And let's, and you can play around with maintaining the height, see what that looks like. Sometimes it'll give you a slight change. This one doesn't even look like it mattered. Okay. Not bad. And if you take a look like in the top view or something, you'll see that it starts to kind of like squeeze in. And that's going to be, basically the same process per rib, rib to rib, rib to rib. You can explore a little bit of rebuilding after the fact. And it looks like if this is a perfectly symmetrical form, which I don't know that it is or not, but we could mirror this potentially if it's perfectly modeled. Let's find out. It looks like it's a little bit off, but probably okay. See, it's a touch off on my end. Not going to matter. I mean, the offset there actually gives us a little bit of help, but we are going to want to join these edges if we do the mirroring. And that clean that up a little bit. Okay. All right, let's try this just one more time while we're still in the process here. I'm just going to draw a construction line out on that end, point to point, put it in midpoint. Just do it again down here. It's going to go to that midpoint. Okay, all right, move that up a bit. I'm going to exaggerate this one a little bit more just for demonstration. Maybe we'll take a look at different options. There we go. This one might be a little bit too much, but see how it looks. All right, switch up my layer. Sweep to all right, so yeah, you can start to see the effect now kind of happening. Let's take a look at the top view. Yeah, we're starting to get some, some internal, the surface that looks like it's been kind of sucked in toward the center, right, because of the tension that's being applied. And then what I did before is all I did is simply loft the two surface edges together, and it's important. So if you type in the edge command, or sorry, the loft command, you'll get an option to either select the curve there or the surface edge. You should select the surface edge because the ISO curves will come with along for the ride, right, and match up really nicely. So that gives you kind of a continuous, at least, kind of surface across. Now this one, it's very unlikely that with the tension across these sets of ribs particularly that it would look like this. Here where you can make a judgment call. In fact, it might make more sense for you to actually just squeeze it against this edge and then over to the next one. In some cases though, like when you're over here, I think it would actually, squeeze between both edges, right, just because of the shape of it. But in this case, because we're going kind of, right, this is convex from the center out, this is concave, and because of that, this is probably a little bit unnatural. So we can take a look at what that looks like by just moving one of our control points over on this construction curve here, and just moving it over to there, seeing if we can play around with that instead. We can delete that construction line because it doesn't matter any longer. And then maybe we want to look at this, move that inward a little bit, something like that. Let's see if that gives us a better effect. We'll have to do something similar down here as well, of course. So I'm just going to move this over to there, delete that, and maybe adjust the form to us slightly. Okay, let's see what that does. So now the rail is going to be different. The rail now is going to be that other curve that we selected before, because that's where it connects. And this one stays the same. And then the two sections are there. Okay. All right. Now we don't need that little patch surface, and this probably looks a bit better. All right. Let's take a look at that in the top view. Yeah, I mean, I would say that looks much better, at least in this area. But again, once you start getting into convex areas, I have to assume that this is going to be more pronounced. Both of these edges will be seen because you're going to be stretching across it in two different, here and there. And so the first process that we did is probably going to be more appropriate, right? So you just have to make a judgment call on like how you develop those curved profiles to get the right effect. Okay, that's more or less it for this exercise. I mean, I hope it gives you some ideas about how you might manually take this on. To get the isocurves to match up, looks like we probably could have done a little bit of a better job there, but I think a rebuild on this might actually cover us. So let's try something here. Let's match this. Maybe just make this 10 or something. See what that looks like. Depends on how you want this to appear as well. Let's try something more like maybe something like that. And let's try this to the same degree here. Yeah, we got that to match up really nicely. Well, that's pretty good. And now this will mirror, you know, again, because we have that straight line down the center. Whether or not it lines up directly over here depends on how careful you were with your modeling of your overall form. This one, as we know, is a little bit off, but it's so slight that it's within our offset anyway. So we could probably just do it. Let me find the middle point there. There we go. Okay, and that's a good idea for what things are going to start looking like. Now, when it gets to areas like in here where we know that the profiles are continuous and they're not broken down the center or pointed, you don't have to probably model this. Or, well, you probably do want to model it, never mind that. But if you don't, whatever you model up top here should continue all the way around. And it might be okay, but if you want more control, you can add that curve anyway. But you should be able to sweep it all the way around without having to do the mirroring. It's up to you. You can either do the mirroring and model the whole thing in half. Not a bad idea. You'll probably be able then to control the isocurves a bit better from this section to the next. But anyway, experiment a little bit with that, and you'll find a process that works. Maybe we can just keep modeling out a little bit. I'm going to try the one that I mentioned before. I guess it's going to be that center one there. I'm going to go from side to side on that to see if I'm right, to see how that looks. And we might even be able to do a little bit of blend surface over that to get it to appear nice. So I'm going to duplicate these edges as well in here. And that should go all the way around. So this one might go a little bit faster. And I'm going to do that one. Okay. Oops, put those in the wrong layer. That's okay. Select last. Put these on the right layer. All right. So just going to repeat what you saw before here. I forgot to do the offset. Well, that's okay. I'm going to keep going. I didn't do the offset, and maybe it's a good demonstration for what it might look like here. In any case, so let's just keep going with it, just for the sake of time. Okay, get rid of these. Don't really need them. I know that I have my control point where I want it anyway. Get that out a little bit. All right, let's see what happens if I just sweep this all the way around without doing one down the center. Might be all right because these are continuous curves going all the way around. Let's see how that looks. Looks pretty good to a quick glance. Looks pretty good. Let's take a look at the top view. Yeah, this is what I was a little worried about. So again, if you want good control over your ISOs and you want to control this more, you can see that they don't quite straighten out in the middle. They don't quite change their direction as you go around as you might expect. Like it doesn't quite mirror itself around naturally. so we may need to do that manually. But here you get the idea. Actually, it's kind of a good example for what that center rib should look like. Let's sweep this around too. There we go. And then you can either patch in a loft there, right, kind of like what we showed before, using the two surface edges, something like that. But now, because I didn't do the offset, you know, that red rib will kind of overlap a little bit. But here's what that would look like, you know. And if your model looks like this, or if your structure looks like this, where you can see very clearly the edges of the structure, then maybe this is fine. Another way to play with this a little bit is maybe to just try to blend these surfaces together and see if that gives us a kind of a subtle, you know, curvature there. Yeah, something like that. Maybe I'll stick with curvature in this case. Yeah, that might look pretty nice, depending on how you're profiling your structure and stuff. Some of you might actually be rounding it out, but that's not a bad version of this anyhow. You know, yeah. So it's an option. It looks pretty smooth. You can turn that off, get a better look at it. You get a sense for how it transitions from one to the other. Not bad. Isocurve wise, we can do a little bit better. So before we do the blend, maybe we can rebuild each of these to the same, you know, right, something like that. And then when you do the blend, it'll continue across evenly, like that. Very nice. Look at this maybe in the render view, see if that, yeah, I guess the render view is not going to show us a whole lot more. But you do get a different sense of it, right? I mean, the surface starts to read a little bit more like it's been stretched over the ribs, even in this area where we had to kind of play with it a bit. I think it's much improved from, you know, just kind of ignoring it, modeling a straight surface across. You can kind of control this using just some basic commands, basic sweeps, and just, you know, constructing it out basically and running it around the frame. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. That's one option for you. You can experiment with that to see if it works for your drawings.